We have injustices facing America, challenging our religious freedoms, our constitutional rights. In the second half of this show, we're going to talk about one of those cases, one of those matters that is a clear challenge to our civil liberties. But the first half of the show, I want to interview someone who is very, very unique. He is a psychotherapist. He works out of Virginia, and he deals with individuals who are having all kinds of issues with regard to their sexual orientation. In fact, he has an incredible story I want him to share with you now, along with what he's accomplishing and what he sees taking place with regards to the LGBT movement and their impact in a negative way upon the lives of so many here in the United States. Thank you for joining us, Christopher Doyle. Appreciate having you on the program, Doctor.
Thanks for having me, and it's a pleasure to be with you today, and thanks for the great work you're doing out in California.
Yeah, well, we're very busy, needless to say.
Yeah,
so,
you've got a lot of work to do there.
We definitely do, but I will tell you though, we're having cases popping up all over the United States. We have our affiliate attorneys all over the United States, and I know Virginia, as nice and as southern as it may seem, is having some struggles and conflicts as well, particularly when it comes to individuals and the challenges that they're facing. First, I want to get some of your background, though. You are a psychotherapist, and you are also someone who is an ex-gay, correct?
Yeah. 12 years ago, I experienced a shift and fluidity in my attractions as a result of a lot of healing that God produced in my life. And I felt it was a calling of mine that God called me to go and become a psychotherapist. And I've been working for about 8.5 years now in this field of sexual and gender identity, mostly with Christians and people of faith that feel that their attractions are not in alignment with who they really believe God created them to be, and that they have unwanted sexual attractions and gender identity conflicts. And I work with those clients and help them basically resolve the traumas that lead them to feel that way and help them kind of step into their true sexual and gender identities of who God created them to be and who they believe they are. But as you know, throughout this country and in some places in the world, the LGBT activists are actively trying to take that right away for licensed counseling, and it's a huge threat. And we're doing everything we can to fight against that. We've been fighting this war for about 5 years now.
Yeah, and I see this as a serious challenge to individual self-determination, religious freedom, and freedom of association. We at Pacific Justice are addressing this, and we're fighting this as a basic civil liberties question. But you've been doing this a good while now, and the big statement on the other side is that it's a big lie. There's no way someone can have their orientation change or their gender identity once it's established. That's what it is. Live with it! !
Nothing but psychological projection on their part.
Right, and
even their top researchers, Lisa Diamond, who is one of the researchers at the American Psychological Association. And she's actually herself a lesbian and a psychological researcher and therapist, has put out research saying that sexuality and orientation and as well as identity are very fluid. At first, it's interesting, she used to think it was just for women, and then she actually put out a study not too long ago that said, actually, I was wrong, it's for men too. So we know that throughout the psychological and the scientific literature, it shows that people do experience change in their orientation with and without therapy.
Now, real quick, does she acknowledge that it's fluid, not just for kids in their adolescence or say early mid-20s? Is she acknowledge that there is fluidity for adults into their 30s or 40s even?
Yeah, in her research, she looked at women who kind of moved in and out of lesbian relationships and kind of studied she studied over 100 women in a study, and she looked at their choices based on who they fell in love with. And what she found was that attractions are very much fluid based on who you fall in love with and who you attach to. And this is a lot of what I talk about in my book that was just published, The Meaning of Sex, A New Christian Ethos. I talk about how sex is not really about sex or sexuality in the sense of physical arousal, but it's really about emotional connection, attachment, and bonding. And a lot of the research, including that put out by Diamond, is showing just that people fall in love with based on who they attach to. And that, of course, that can go both ways. Of course, someone can can go the homosexual route if they really wanted to, but that's far less likely in the psychological research that happens.
Okay,
What
now
we mostly see is that people that are same-sex attracted and have been in lesbian or gay relations for quite many years sometimes end up falling in love with and even going through life experiences, including therapy, that shifts or alters their sexual attractions, and they end up identifying a different way.
Right. Now, let me ask you real clearly here. What exactly is this kind of therapy? It's not water torture or any other kind of mumbo jumbo stuff that that propaganda people are trying to say it is. This is counseling. And what kind of issues do you address in counseling that you have found to be so successful in helping people who want this kind of counseling, who want to be freed from this kind of compelled feelings of sexual attraction?
Well, I think it's really interesting that the therapy that I do for clients that experience sexual or gender conflicts is really not so different than the therapy I do. I have two practices. One of my practices focus just on sexual and gender identity. It's called the Institute for Healthy Families.
Okay.
And I work with a variety of clients and families. In fact, I do intensive in-person and home-based therapy for lots of families that are struggling with that because they don't know how to get their kids help. They feel like there's something wrong in the family dynamic, but they don't know really how to work through that. And I end up working with these families intensely. I travel throughout the States and Mexico, and I go to these homes for weekends at a time, and I help them in 48 hours or 2 days of therapy. I help them make major breakthroughs in intimacy and communication and understanding how to love their LGBT-identified children and the children who are struggling.
I really like what you just said because you understand the importance of maintaining the parent relationship with their children who are going through these
Absolutely.
issues, of having love, compassion, understanding. I think that's fantastic. But what about on the other side? How do you counsel someone who's going through these struggles?
Sure.
How do you approach this? I mean,
mostly from a trauma-based perspective, because what we find is that individuals who are struggling with their sexual gender identity have experienced quite a bit of trauma in their backgrounds. And by doing good trauma therapy, which is not unlike the therapy that I do for other clients with different issues, they resolve those traumas, and a lot of times the sexual attractions or compulsions resolve by itself.
Really?
Absolutely. When you do, I've been working with a transgender identified man who wanted to transition to a woman for the last 9 months, okay? And he came into my office. His parents wanted him to come. He came a little bit, begrudgingly because he knew who I was. He had read on the internet. I'm fairly high profile in this area of sexual and gender identity. And he had all kind of preconceived notions. And I simply did good therapy with this young man who wanted to be a woman. 9 months later, the young man did an interview with a gay outlet on the internet and said, I've now detransitioned from transgenderism because I've never been able to find a happy transgender person in all of my connecting online with these people, this community. These people are not happy. And I started just by my therapist asking me really good questions, okay? I started to realize that this whole transgender thing was complete craziness and that I was on a path to self-mutilation and sterilization for the rest of my life. And just by doing good therapy with this young man, he detransitioned. Now he's on the path of healing. He's incorporating into the group of men that I do group therapy with, and he's much happier today than he was a year ago.
Okay, real quick, what exactly do you address when you talk about trauma? What are we talking about?
We're talking about sexual abuse. We're talking about physical and psychological abuse. We're talking about emotional rejection and bullying from peers. And we're talking about a lack of attachment and bonding, typically with the same sex. And we call this attachment trauma.
With the same sex, you mean like their father, their dad?
Yeah, their father or male peers, okay? And you can also see attachment trauma if you look at, for example, orphans, okay? My wife and I adopted 2 orphans from China. They have attachment trauma. This is similar to the same type of attachment trauma that a lot of my clients have because they never attached to their fathers, if it's a guy, or their mothers as a woman, or they never attached to their same-sex peers. So they have this sense of gender inferiority, and then when they reach puberty, that becomes sexualized. All those emotional needs become sexualized. I talk about this in my book, The Meaning of Sex, A New Christian Ethos, where I explain from an attachment perspective how sexuality and orientation develops, and also how you can heal those issues and come out of that if you want to.
Okay, now, Dr. Doyle, let me just ask you point blank, what is your success rate in helping these people who want this treatment, who want this therapy?
In my opinion, those who undergo therapy and they really get to the roots of their issues, of what's causing them to feel this way, these unwanted attractions, make tremendous progress. And that will be different from everyone.
Okay.
For everyone. They would do a different kind of client. But let me say this, that in order to really understand this issue, you have to understand how attachment works, okay? And so even for clients that may do a lot of work, but all their attractions for their either unwanted homosexual attractions or gender identity attractions don't all go away, which is a common experience for many clients. They might have some residual attractions. When they understand intimacy, attachment, and bonding, and they're able to form healthy relationships with an opposite-sex partner, okay, similar to my wife and I, our intimacy and attraction for each other grew over time. It wasn't about sex. It was emotional connection. And this is a big piece that I help teach my clients, is that connecting sexually with someone means you have to connect with them emotionally, okay?
Right.
And so we help our clients who are men connect and attach emotionally to the same sex in healthy ways, and eventually, if it's their goal, connect and attach emotionally healthy to the opposite sex. If they do that, unhealthy sexual attractions decrease, and healthy for them sexual attractions to the opposite sex increase, and they go on to live happily married lives.
Right. Dr. Doyle, this has been really very helpful to hear your expertise. Now, if someone is anywhere in the country, it's not just people in Virginia you're helping people all throughout the country. What's your website where people can go who say, hey, this may help me, this may help someone I know or someone I care about?
Yeah.
Where do they go, real quickly?
Absolutely. InstituteForHealthyFamilies.org, InstituteForHealthyFamilies.org, and we offer online counseling as well as in-person counseling in our office in Northern Virginia. And like I said earlier in the segment, I travel to families who are struggling with their children who are LGBT identified. And we don't convert anyone or change anyone. We help the whole family heal, okay?
Right.
And we believe that when we get to the roots of the family dynamics and heal those issues, good things and change happens within the whole structure of the family, and that's what we do.
Great. Dr. Doyle, thank you for being on the show, and keep up the great work.
Thank you very much. God bless.
So on June 7th, I went to pick up my daughter from kindergarten, and she ran up to me and said that her friend was no longer a boy, he was now a girl, and that he had a new girl name. Went home, asked my daughter about it. I looked up the book on YouTube. My daughter told me the name of the book. It was I Am Jazz. So we watched the book being read, and we found out that she had been taught what transgenderism is. He had come to school dressed as a boy. The teacher had read the book, and afterwards he went into the bathroom, which was in the classroom. He went into the bathroom, changed into a dress, and came out. He was then announced as his new girl name, and the class was told that he was now a girl. For my daughter, having that book read and then seeing her little friend that she had known since preschool go into a bathroom, change clothes, and come out, in her 5-year-old brain, she thought, oh my goodness, all I have to do to change into a boy is to change my clothes. My daughter was taking a bath, and she got up out of the water, and her hair was slicked back, and she saw a reflection of herself. And she started crying and shaking, and she was like, Mommy, I turned into a boy. I don't want to be a boy. And she was scared. She was really concerned about what she was wearing or how she looked. There were other kids in the class that were afraid that their blood could turn into boy blood. Another little boy went home, and his mom had to have the entire sex talk with him about body parts. It was very confusing. And again, the parents had no idea what had been taught in class. So they were all exposed to this highly controversial sexual topic without having any, without even thinking about their own sexuality yet. There were members of the LGBT community that were actually transgender that came up to us and said, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry that happened. And I stand with you, and I'm for parental rights. And that wasn't right what happened, and I'm so sorry that got taught to them. And that to me was just so amazing, because the point of it was I was protecting my daughter and the other kids in that class, because they all have the right to be protected, all of them. And so it was actually really beautiful. I loved working with the Pacific Justice Institute because I felt like they had my same heart. It wasn't about like fear or judgment or anything. It was like, hey, let's like support you and help you through this, and let's fight for the rights for everybody. It was never about hate or anything, which made it super easy. I would totally recommend Pacific Justice Institute if you have something that happened at your school, if you have legal questions. Don't be afraid to stand up for what's right and to protect your kids.
When we heard about this situation at Rockland Academy, we got involved right away. We gave counsel to the parents on what the law did or didn't say, and we drafted a model policy for the charter school to adopt. Now, unfortunately, the school refused to apologize to the parents for the lack of communication, and they also refused to give a strong assurance to the parents that they would receive prior notice or that they would have the opportunity to opt their children out of similar circumstances in the future. If you ever have trouble with your school teaching your child something that you feel is not appropriate for your child, don't hesitate to give us a call or go to our website, pji.org. We're here to help. And folks, if you decide to support the Pacific Justice Institute on either a one-time or a monthly basis, we greatly appreciate that. That's how we do our work. That's how we're able to have the resources to be able to file these cases, to defend these people. And in appreciation for that, we have some valuable resources on our webpage, including an opt-out form that can be utilized by any parent throughout the states, all across the United States. They could utilize this to help protect their children from outrageous, controversial materials dealing with sex education and other kinds of new liberal social issues that you may not feel as a Christian is something that you want your child to be taught and indoctrinated with. It's a wildfire. It's going across the country, this material, and this opt-out form is very important. Once again, you can get this by going to our website, pacificjustice.org, pacificjustice.org. If you have any questions or you need any assistance, we are here to help you, always without charge, at the Pacific Justice Institute. Now, we have with us here in the studio one of our attorneys who heads up our Southern California office, Michael Peffer, to talk about a very important case dealing with the discrimination of a professor for not a very justifiable reason by any stretch of the imagination. Michael, tell us about this case. Tell us why this professor has been so wrongfully treated by this junior college in Riverside County, California.
Yes, hi, Brad. Thanks. And you know, our client, he's a good guy. He's got a good heart. He loves the Lord, but he's actually a scholar too. He actually does his homework, and
he's been a professor for not just a few months,
in excess of 11 years.
11 years.
Yes,
okay.
He's been tenured for most of that time,
right.
But. So he teaches a sociology class, so the natural realm of study is going to be the family unit, the units in other units in society,
right? Yeah.
and how those are affected by various events that are happening in culture. So obviously, same-sex marriage is right up there, and
totally.
At the time that he was being penalized for it, it was actually even more critical because what was happening is the Obergefell decision, the decision that legalized same-sex marriage, it hadn't even been decided yet.
Well, wait a minute. Okay, so that decision hadn't come down, which means it was an extremely hot issue.
Correct.
That a sociology professor of any competence couldn't ignore with regards to classroom discussion, classroom debate, looking at the arguments, something extremely relevant to sociology and the development of our nation. And so the decision hadn't come down yet. He addresses it. Did he? And how he addressed it, was that the issue? Did he? Let me ask you this: did he use any bad language to insult one group or another group? What exactly did he do to justify this bombardment of harassment against him by this publicly funded junior college in Riverside County?
That's a really good question. It's really important for our purposes. So what he was doing was his teaching style is, okay, I'm going to give the opposite point of view than is really the if you will popular point of view. And so he's saying, well, what about Justice Thomas did the argument, what about Justice Alito, what about 4 lawyers getting married? That's what Justice Alito said. And so he started a conversation. Well, what do you think about what Justice Alito said? What about 4 people getting married? Basically trying to take it to the extreme of
right,
so that the students can be talking about it and giving heed to it. And
right.
and he, I would not call him at all like an angry individual. I think he's playful in some instances with the class. So what about this and what about that? What do you think of this? And these are issues involving, for instance, same-sex marriage. And
right.
so, of course, what is crucial here is that his language is not the issue. But they make it the issue. And what I mean by that is we see a real infantilization of students. These are adults
Wait a second,
now.
you say his language. Did he say any name calling, any terms at all that are insulting words? I don't want to say them on the air.
Right.
But you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Name calling in terms of gays, calling them something, a term that's very hostile, or other people. Did he say that in the classroom? These blankety blanks? Yes or no?
No, he did not.
Okay,
no,
so he clearly
no
did not. So that you say language, you're talking about the fact that he was addressing the issue and encouraging conversation and debate.
Correct.
Which I think, frankly, Michael, is an excellent professor. Yes. One that stirs debate, uses some Socratic method. In fact, all law schools use Socratic method of asking questions. So he didn't say anything that was pejorative, any name calling at all. It says he simply stirred a debate and conversation in a topic that was directly relevant to the subject he was teaching, with sociology. Is that a correct statement?
That's absolutely correct. And the thing is that he was drawing comparison with other ways in which society has tinkered with the institution of marriage, and he was bringing those in and so that the students could talk.
Right.
And what happens here is when he says, for instance, studies show that religious families have stronger, longer-lasting marriages.
Right.
And
That's
that's
a
not
fact.
Christian studies. There's studies that actually
Right.
demonstrate that. What they hear
Indisputable, yeah.
Exactly. What they hear is, if you're not married, a man and a woman, then you're no good. That's not what he said, obviously, but that's what they hear, and it's really
right. Well, they skewed what he was saying to say what they wanted him to say to justify getting rid of him, because he obviously doesn't comport with the dictates and the mandate of this university. And we're seeing this in universities, public universities in particular, all across the United States. You don't go along with the ideology, the extremist liberal ideology, leftist ideology, or we're going to find a way to have you booted out. And that's exactly what they did with him. What happened exactly to him? Because I want people to understand this wasn't just something that was a little slap on the hand.
No, it wasn't. And I just want our listeners and the people that support us to know we have spent a lot of time on this, defending this man, that these are very meaningful cases. And sometimes, PGI, we can't just write a letter. Sometimes we have to litigate these cases. And it's not something that we take pleasure about necessarily, because our clients, this is very hard on our clients.
Right.
But Pacific Justice Institute is there to put in the hours that are necessary to make this happen
Lots
at
of
no
hours.
charge to our client. Yes, this arbitration that we just participated in over the span of 3 weeks, we're probably talking in excess of 100 hours just to this case alone. And just the preparation, there were a dozen witnesses involved. So we actually get involved in this, and we take care of our client. And each day we spoke with our client, and then the in between days, the point is that sometimes merely asking people to stop this wrong behavior is not enough, and
Right.
we have to litigate on behalf of our clients, which is what we do.
Right. And I think that's real important for people to understand that, sending a demand letter can be very helpful. We get, I'd say about 9 out of 10 of the times that we send demand letters, we get things resolved. The other side sees the law, sees where they blew it, they correct it. Sure. Taxpayers are saved from having to pay, government attorneys to represent a case that they shouldn't be having to take on. And we're very gracious in that regard. But if a government entity in particular decides that, no, they're going to continue doing what's wrong, no, they're not going to correct their wrong, even after we give them notice, then we put on our litigator hat and we litigate. And we litigate hard to make it very clear to the other side that we will not allow this to happen. And we don't just do a little brief litigation and one hearing and then go home. I mean, we stick with these people all the way through the process, and we're going to stick with this professor all the way through the process because his rights have been clearly violated. And if we let this continue to happen, Michael, I'm concerned that we're going to see more and more professors like him purged from public universities. It's happening at a rate, and an alarming rate, I think, more than ever before.
Yes, and it was, I will tell you, after listening to these days of evidence, which is arbitration is like a trial. We get in and
Right.
people bring evidence and we cross-examine and that kind of thing. But the evidence really is scary, the evidence that makes it so that our guy got fired. He didn't just get the demerit.
He lost his job. He was fired.
That's correct. He lost a job that he was really good at, and that the evaluations that he has received over the years have been good, not just from the faculty, the administration, but from students that appreciate his perspective and the way he runs his class.
Right. Well, Michael, I thank you for the work that you've done on behalf of him and the Pacific Justice Institute. I know we at Pacific Justice are working hard to help people just like him who are being snubbed out, people who maybe may not get help anywhere else, but for the fact that Pacific Justice Institute cares and wants to make sure that no one is ever left on the side of the road. It's very unique about Pacific Justice. We want to make sure that no one is ever left on the side of the road, that everyone is able to get the protection that they need when it comes to defense of their religious freedom and their parental rights and the sanctity of human life. Once again, Michael, thank you for the great work that you're doing. It's most appreciated.
Much. I'm blessed to be able to do it. Thanks.
So, folks, there you have it. It's our God-given freedoms we're talking about. Now, let's choose to keep them. I'm Dacus of the Pacific Justice Institute. Have a great weekend.